Get out of the way or the engineer dies. Put the weapon down, or what exactly? You don't want to find out. The Vareth Deep Space Relay Station sat at the outer edge of Coalition survey territory, anchored to a slow-moving asteroid belt that nobody had found useful enough to mine, and nobody had found empty enough to ignore. It was the kind of installation that appeared on navigational charts as a small gray dot with a designation number and no common name, because the people who built it had been thinking about signal coverage and not about the kind of place that gets a name. The station's official designation was DSR-7 Varath. The 43 people who lived and worked there called it the Gray, because the asteroid dust that accumulated on the exterior viewports gave everything outside a gray cast that never entirely went away, regardless of how many times the maintenance crew ran the cleaning cycle. The Gray existed for one reason. It was the best signal amplification point in a 200 light-year radius for the Coalition's deep space communications network. Every transmission from the outer survey fleets, every navigation beacon update, every medical consultation request from the fringe stations, all of it passed through DSR-7 Varath before it went anywhere useful. The station was not glamorous. It was not dangerous by design. It was not the kind of place that attracted attention from anyone who had better options. On the morning the Thurvak extraction team arrived, the station was running a skeleton crew. 43 personnel had been temporarily reduced to 29, because a resupply vessel had been delayed by a navigation anomaly 3 sectors away, and 12 non-essential staff had been authorized to transit on the inbound courier. Non-essential, in this context, meant anyone whose specific technical function was not required to keep the relay array operational at minimum capacity for the next 6 days. The designation of non-essential had not applied to Devon Marsh. Devon was 29 years old. He held the title of Systems Integration Technician Grade 3, which was the kind of title that told you exactly what someone did and suggested very little about why it mattered. His official personnel file described him as competent, reliable, and technically proficient, which was the language HR used for people who did their jobs without creating paperwork. His supervisor had written the same evaluation 3 cycles in a row. It was accurate in the way that calling the ocean wet is accurate. True, but insufficient. What the file did not contain was any record of the 18 months Devon had spent before his Coalition posting, because those 18 months were under a separate classification that his systems integration position did not require anyone to know about. And Devon had not volunteered the information. He had spent those 18 months as a technical specialist embedded with the 3rd Joint Special Operations Task Force, working electronic warfare and communications interdiction in 3 separate conflict zones before a shrapnel injury to his left shoulder had ended his field eligibility. The injury had healed. The clearance had not been renewed by his own request. He had applied for the DSR posting 6 months later, and had spent the 2 years since maintaining relay arrays and writing incident reports that his supervisor found unremarkable. He was, in the language of the Thurvak extraction team's pre-mission variable. The Thurvak were not Coalition. They were not a member species, not a signatory to the Communications Access Treaties, and not, technically, authorized to dock at DSR-7 Varath without prior clearance. They had docked anyway, using a falsified beacon signature that identified their vessel as a Coalition Geological Survey ship, which was the kind of cover that worked on automated docking systems and would not have survived a manual inspection. The Thurvak had timed their arrival for a shift window. They had done research. There were 9 of them. Their documentation said 7. Their actual purpose was the extraction of a Thurvak national named HFY, who had been at the station for 11 days under a Coalition diplomatic transit visa, which was a legitimate document that had been obtained through legitimate channels, and which gave HFY the legal right to be at DSR-7 Varath for up to 30 days. HFY was, according to his visa application, a cultural liaison traveling to attend a multi-species symposium at the Coalition interior. He was, according to the Thurvak Directorate of Internal Security, a defector in possession of operational intelligence that had become significantly more sensitive in the 11 days since his departure. The Directorate wanted him back. They had decided not to request this through diplomatic channels, because diplomatic channels took time and created records. What the 9-person extraction team found when they moved through the station's corridor to the communications hub, where HFY had been spending his days observing relay operations with the polite interest of someone who had described himself as broadly curious about technology, was Dr. Selavos, the station's communications systems director, standing at the main console with a calibration tool in her hand, and the specific expression of someone who had been interrupted mid-task and was not pleased about it. Sela was 44 years old. She had a doctorate in applied signal theory and had spent 16 years managing communications infrastructure in progressively more remote locations, because she found remote locations preferable to the politics of the interior. She wore her dark hair pulled back, and she had the kind of calm that people develop when they have spent enough time in places where panic is a resource you cannot afford to waste. When the lead extraction operative, a heavy-set Thurvak named Prevath, entered the hub with 6 of his team behind him and leveled a weapon at her, Sela did not panic. She set down the calibration tool. "This is a restricted technical area," she said. "You need authorization to be here, and you need to put that weapon away." Prevath told her what he needed, and it was not her authorization. 40 feet down the corridor, in the relay maintenance access shaft that ran parallel to the communications hub, Devon Marsh heard the alert that wasn't an alert. The station's formal alarm system had not triggered, because the Thurvak had cut the manual alarm access from the docking bay, and the automated system required a command-level override that none of the 29 remaining staff had initiated. What Devon heard was the ambient sound of the hub changing. Specifically, the particular acoustic signature of the room's secondary ventilation panel, which ran directly behind the main console, and which Devon had replaced 3 months ago and had refitted with a resonance dampener that he had machined himself because the original part had been on backorder, and the sound was giving him headaches. The resonance dampener did something the original part did not. It transmitted low-frequency vibrations from the hub into the maintenance shaft at a specific range that Devon's ears had, over 3 months of incidental exposure, learned to read. He could not hear words. He could hear the pattern of a room where something was wrong. He was already moving when the second pattern reached him, the specific vibration of equipment being handled incorrectly. The weight distribution shift of multiple people moving in a coordinated pattern that was not how the communications team moved. He pulled up the hub's internal sensor data on his handheld, which had access to the station's systems because his job required it, and read the occupancy count. 9 people who were not on the shift roster. He did not trigger the alarm. He thought about it for 2 seconds and did not, because triggering the alarm would tell the 9 people that someone knew they were there. And he did not yet know enough about their positions to assess what they would do with that information. Instead, he sent a single-character status ping to the station director's console and marked it as a routine maintenance check. The station director was a careful man who had worked with Devon long enough to know that Devon did not send routine maintenance checks. The station director would look at his console and he would see the ping, and he would do whatever the station director decided to do. And in the meantime, Devon moved through the maintenance shaft toward the communications hub. He was carrying a standard-issue station repair kit and a handheld diagnostic unit. He was not carrying anything that looked like a weapon, because he was officially a systems integration technician responding to a maintenance issue. Inside the hub, Prevath had organized his team efficiently. 2 operatives were at the door. 4 were positioned around the room. 1 was running a data extraction on the secondary console. Prevath himself had positioned Sela Voss between himself and the room's main entrance, with his weapon against her temple, because he had learned from operational experience that having a hostage in eyeline of the door simplified conversations with anyone who came through it. Osset Var was seated in the corner, not visibly distressed, with the particular composure of someone who had known this was a possibility and had reached an accommodation with the fact. When the maintenance panel in the floor of the hub slid open, it did so quietly, because Devon had refitted its hinges 6 weeks ago with low-friction bearings. Because the original hinges had been squeaking, and the squeak was audible during high-precision calibration work. The panel opened from the inside, which was possible because the access shaft ran the length of the hub, and the panel was the standard exit point. Prevath did not look at the panel when it opened. He was watching the door. This was the assessment error. The team's pre-mission evaluation of DSR-7 Verith had identified all standard entry and exit points. The maintenance panel was on the blueprint. It had been assessed as a secondary variable, unlikely to be used by personnel responding to an alert, because the maintenance shaft required a technical clearance code to access, and the assumption had been that the station's technical staff would not have the situational awareness to use it under duress. The assumption was wrong for reasons that the Thurvak Directorate of Internal Security would later document in an incident analysis as unexpected specialist profile in technical role, which was the language their analysts used when they had encountered someone whose actual capability did not match the profile associated with their job title. What happened in the next 23 seconds was recorded by the hub's internal systems log, which captured it as a sequence of sensor events rather than video. Weight distribution shifts, power fluctuations from equipment being moved, atmospheric pressure variations consistent with rapid physical movement in an enclosed space. The Coalition's Communications Security Division reviewed the sensor log afterward and spent considerable time reconstructing the sequence before filing a report that described it as demonstrating a significantly non-standard approach to multi-target threat neutralization in a confined space with a hostage variable. What the report meant was that Devon had done something the review team had not previously seen performed by someone without field active status. The first two operatives nearest the maintenance panel were not in a position to respond to something coming from a direction they had not assessed as a threat vector. The third and fourth operatives were processing the information that something was happening before they had the data required to act on it. By the time Preveth understood that the threat was not at the door, which was the direction he had been watching, but behind him and to his left, which was the direction he had designated as secured, the weapon that had been against Selavos's temple was no longer in his hand. It had been removed by a technique that Devon had spent approximately 800 hours practicing in a training facility in Nevada, under the supervision of an instructor who had used the phrase, "You will do this until you don't think about doing it," with a consistency that Devon had found, at the time, excessive, and had found subsequently entirely correct. Preveth was on the floor. His weapon was in Devon's left hand. Devon's right hand was occupied with the physical management of the situation in a way that ensured Preveth's continued cooperation without requiring Preveth's consent. The remaining operatives stopped moving. Selavos, who had not moved during the 23 seconds, looked at Preveth on the floor, then at the four other operatives in various states of incapacitation around the hub, then at Devon, who was standing between her and Preveth with the expression of someone who has finished a task and is now doing the mental accounting of whether the task has been completed correctly. "You," she said. "Dr. Voss," Devon said. "You came through the floor." "The panel," he said. "I refitted the hinges in March. They open quietly now." Sela looked at him for a moment. She was a woman who had spent 16 years reading technical documentation, and she was currently reading him, and the information she was receiving did not match the file she had for Systems Integration Technician, Grade 3, Devon Marsh. "March," she said. "The squeak was affecting my calibration accuracy. Is that why you refitted it?" Devon considered this. "That was one reason," he said. The station's alert system triggered at second 4 of the incident, triggered by the power fluctuation in the hub, which the automated system had read as an equipment fault before reclassifying it, when the weight distribution data came through as a security event. Backup personnel arrived at the 3.5-minute mark. They entered the communications hub and found 9 Thurvak operatives secured. One communications systems director standing at her console with a calibration tool she had apparently picked back up. One cultural liaison seated in the corner with the same composure he had demonstrated throughout, and one systems integration technician finishing his assessment of the room and beginning his incident documentation. The station director, who was among the backup personnel, looked at Devon for a long moment. "I got your ping," the station director said. "I know," Devon said. "Single character. I didn't want to give them information." The station director looked at the 9 secured operatives. He looked at Devon. He looked at the maintenance panel, which was still open. "Your file," the station director said slowly, "is accurate," Devon said. "I am a systems integration technician, Grade 3. Grade 3, Devon confirmed. The station director said nothing for a moment. Then, "We're going to have a longer conversation about this." "I know," Devon said. "I'll bring the documentation." The Coalition filed a formal diplomatic complaint with the Thurvak Directorate of Internal Security within 2 hours. The Thurvak Directorate filed its own internal report, which was obtained through intelligence channels 4 weeks later, and which described the DSR-7 Verith incident as a failure of pre-mission intelligence resulting from inadequate assessment of personnel profiles in low-visibility technical installations. The specific phrasing the Directorate's analyst used was, "Asset capability exceeded designated role classification by a margin inconsistent with standard staffing protocols." It was the language of people who had encountered something they had not prepared for and were processing it by filing paperwork. The Thurvak did not attempt another extraction from a coalition communications facility for 14 months. HFY completed his transit to the coalition interior on schedule, 11 days later. His coalition liaison coordinator noted in the transit file that he had been, throughout the incident and its aftermath, remarkably composed. HFY had told the coordinator through a translator that he had calculated the possibility of an extraction attempt and had found it acceptable, because he had observed the station's technical staff in the days before the attempt and had concluded that at least one of them was not what they appeared to be. He had been, he said, reasonably confident in the outcome. The coordinator had found this assessment surprising. HFY had found her surprise surprising. They had ended the conversation politely, as people do when they have discovered they were operating with different information. Sayla found Devon in the relay maintenance corridor 2 days after the incident, running a diagnostic on the hub's secondary array. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee, actual coffee, not the synthesized version, from a personal supply she had been rationing since the resupply delay. She set one next to his diagnostic kit without asking. Devon looked at the cup, then at her. "I looked at your file again," she said. "It's accurate. It's incomplete." She leaned against the corridor wall, wrapping both hands around her own cup. 18 months between your graduate program and your first coalition posting. Nothing in the file. Devon ran a calibration sequence on the array before he answered. "Nothing required. For a grade 3 technician." A pause. "Which you are, which I am." Sayla was quiet for a moment, looking at the array rather than at him. She had spent 16 years in remote installations, which meant she had spent 16 years learning the difference between privacy and concealment, and between people who were guarded because they were protecting something dangerous, and people who were guarded because they had learned, at some point, that the full information caused more problems than it solved. She had gotten reasonably good at reading the distinction. "The shoulder," she said. Devon was quiet for a moment. "Left side. Field injury?" "Yes." She nodded, once, in the way of someone who has asked a question and received an answer and is not going to press for more than was given. The corridor hummed around them, the relay array cycling through its transmission sequence, the ventilation system doing what ventilation systems do, the particular ambient sound of a station that was back to functioning normally after 2 days of not functioning normally at all. "The maintenance panel hinges," she said. "Yes, you refitted them because of the squeak, among other reasons. The other reasons being..." Devon looked at the array. "If you know which access panels open quietly, you know which ones are useful in a situation where you need to move through a space without announcing yourself. It's useful information to have. On a station that's classified as low risk in a buffer zone that's been reclassified 3 times in the last 4 years. He paused. The squeak was also genuinely annoying. Sayla was quiet for a moment. Then she made some noise that was not quite a laugh but was in the neighborhood of one. "The calibration accuracy," she said. "That was also true." "Are true, generally," he said. She looked at him then with the direct assessing quality of a woman who has spent a long time reading technical systems and had at some point extended that practice to reading people. Devon met the look without adjusting his expression, which was the same focused neutrality it had been in the hub and in the maintenance shaft before that, and in the 2 days of debriefs and documentation and formal interviews since. "Are you all right?" she asked. The question arrived with a specificity that distinguished it from the versions of the question she asked patients. She had basic medical training, as most senior staff in remote installations did, and from the version that station HR asked during mandatory post-incident evaluations. It was the version asked by someone who had been in the room, who had felt the weight of the 23 seconds from the inside, and who was now asking about the person who had spent those seconds doing something that looked, from the outside, like a professional task, and which she suspected, from the inside, was somewhat more than that. Devon had been asked, in the preceding 2 days, approximately 37 questions about the incident. He had answered all of them accurately and in the appropriate order of operational significance. No one had asked him this one. He ran the next calibration sequence before he answered. The array beeped twice, indicating clean signal acquisition on both primary bands. "Yes," he said. Then, with the same precision he applied to technical documentation, "That's the first time anyone's asked." Sayla looked at her coffee cup. "The first time today?" "The first time," he said. "In this context, after something like that." She was quiet, and the quiet had a particular quality, not uncomfortable, not filling itself with noise, just present. The corridor hummed. The relay array ran its sequence. The coffee, which she had rationed from a personal supply, and which was considerably better than the synthesized version, cooled to a temperature that was better for drinking. "The patient, Osset Var," Devon said after a while. "He's been cleared for transit, medically and otherwise. I know. I checked the outbound documentation." A pause. "I also flagged his file with a communications monitoring request. Standard diplomatic transit protocol." Another pause, shorter. "It's not standard diplomatic transit protocol." Sella looked at him. "If something happens to him after he's outside Coalition space," Devon said, "the monitoring request means there's a record of any communications involving his transit documentation, timestamp, routing, content flags. If the Thurvak tries something through back channels, there's a trail." He looked at the array. "It won't stop anything, but it means it doesn't happen without a record." Sela was quiet for a moment. "Does he know?" "No, the request is administrative. He'd have to read 3 layers of transit documentation to find it. But it's there." "It's there," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, the same reading she had been doing since the hub, still finding information that didn't match the file. "That's not nothing," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." They stayed in the maintenance corridor while the relay array ran its sequences, and the station returned, gradually, to the specific rhythm of a place that had been disrupted, and was now reassembling itself around the disruption, incorporating it, filing it in the category of things that had happened and been resolved. The coffee was good. The diagnostic numbers were clean. Outside the viewports, the asteroid belt moved in the slow way it always moved, indifferent to the things that happened in the gray station anchored to its edge. Devon finished the calibration. He noted the results in his maintenance log, which was where he noted all results, with the same precision and the same grade designation and the same job title. The log would be filed, the station director would review it. It would be unremarkable, except that the station director had been reviewing Devon's logs differently for 2 days now, reading the same entries he had always read and finding the different information that had always been there. Scylla did not leave when the calibration was done. Devon did not suggest she should. The corridor hummed, the coffee cooled. The relay array at the edge of Coalition territory kept transmitting, because that was what it was built for, and outside, the Vareth asteroid belt kept moving, indifferent and slow, and inside, the most comfortable silence Devon Marsh had found in 2.5 years of Coalition posting settled between 2 people in a maintenance corridor who had, separately and together, just been through something they did not have the right paperwork for.